Beijing throws down the gauntlet in national security law for Hong Kong. National security law sees Hong Kong stocks post their biggest fall in nearly 5 years. And China sets no GDP target for the first time in years.
Good evening and welcome. A mixture of anger, fear, but also satisfaction in some quarters tonight after Beijing announced national security legislation for Hong Kong.
It says the legal framework and enforcement mechanisms are necessary to plug the city's long-term security loopholes. Jackie Lin begins our coverage.
Following months of unrest in Hong Kong, it appears that Beijing has run out of patience with the city. The National People's Congress has set to motion a national security law for Hong Kong. Under Beijing's plan, the law will be incorporated through Annex 3 of the Basic Law instead of Article 23. It means the law, unlike others, can bypass Hong Kong's legislative procedure and be directly implemented by the SAR government to ban acts of secession, subversion, terrorism, and foreign interference. Among the bones of contention in the NPC's draft resolution is its Article 4, which says the central government could set up mainland security agencies in Hong Kong when the need arises.
23条立法
In the opening speech of today's two-sessions meeting, Vice Chairman of the NPC Standing Committee Wang Chen says, since 2003, the national security legislation has been stigmatized and demonized in the SAR. Considering Hong Kong's present situation, Wang says the country needs to take up the long-stalled effort to change the city's long-term defenseless status. He added any foreign and local subversive forces would be prevented, stopped, and punished. Under the new arrangement, Hong Kong's chief executive must regularly report to the central government on the SAR's performance in enforcing national security and its education. Today, the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office said that the legislation won't encroach on Hong Kong citizens' freedoms and rights. The office maintains that the city's one country, two systems principle, its high degree of autonomy, capitalist, and judicial systems would all remain unchanged. The legislation will be voted on by delegates of the NPC Standing Committee next Thursday. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam says she will fully cooperate with Beijing's plan, adding the legislation will not affect Hong Kong's judicial independence or its legal entities.
But the pro-democracy camp says this is a sad day for the city, calling it the end of one country, two systems. Pinky Wong with that story.
Xi Jinping had torn away the whole pretense of one country, two systems. So they are announcing to the world that Hong Kong is no longer under one country, two system. It is now one country, one system.
Li says Beijing is now directly taking control.
Everyone knows that in China, when they talk about national security, it is just criticism of the Communist Party. Like what happened to Liu Xiaobo. Liu Xiaobo is advocating only for democracy, and he was jailed in the name of subversion of 11 years in jail. It's the Chinese Communist Party trying to make all people in Hong Kong become Liu Xiaobo, because we people in Hong Kong had always been exercising our rights and freedom to criticize China, to advocate for democracy. So now the advocate for democracy is a crime.
The whole process actually is trying to avoid Hong Kong legislature. We have no role to play because all the role has been taken up by the Standing Committee of the NPC. It is totally against our mini constitution. That means our basic law. It's a complete dishonor of promises that made under the Sino and British joint declaration.
The pro-Beijing camp, including LegCo's president, expressed its firm support.
I respect, understand, and support this initiative. The Hong Kong SAR is an inalienable part of PRC. Hong Kong has the constitutional responsibilities to enact laws in accordance with Article 23 of Basic Law.
And today's stock market plunge did not sway support for the legislation from this pro-establishment lawmaker.
For 23 years, in the absence of proper national security legislation, I think the central government has been very tolerant. When you compare the national security of the People's Republic of China and the safety of its people, the stock performance in the Hong Kong stock market pales into insignificance.
Pinky Wong, TVB News.
Meanwhile, strong opposition against the security legislation was voiced overseas. Sharon Tang reports.
Before leaving the White House on Thursday, U.S. President Donald Trump was pressed on whether he knew anything about national security laws being imposed on Hong Kong.
I don't know what it is because nobody knows yet. If it happens, we'll address that issue very strongly.
He spoke on the matter again while in Michigan.
Do you have a message for the Chinese government about changing the relationship with Hong Kong?
Well, we'll have to see what happens. I haven't seen it yet. I've gotten a little briefing, but I'll have a statement to make at the appropriate time. Okay? Hong Kong's been through a lot.
Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department says Beijing has already broken its commitments laid down in the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Spokeswoman Morgan Ortagus said that any effort to impose national security legislation that does not reflect the will of the people of Hong Kong would be highly destabilizing and would be met with strong condemnation from the United States and the international community. Republican Senator Josh Hawley posted on social media and slammed China for depriving Hong Kong human rights and freedom. Two other senators plan to propose a bill that would sanction Chinese officials and businesses linked to them. The UK's Foreign Office stressed that Britain will fully protect Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy as one of the countries that signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Hong Kong's last British governor, Chris Patten, says the UK should tell China that the proposal is outrageous. He added China was using their preoccupation with the coronavirus pandemic to bully and harass in other areas such as Hong Kong. Canada's foreign minister says he will closely monitor the situation given there are 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
Well, Hong Kong stocks suffered their worst losses in almost 5 years after Beijing announced its intention to impose national security laws on the city. Hang Seng Index plunged 5.6% to close at 22,930 in heavy turnover. Property stocks were the hardest hit amid concern over potential outflows. Analysts say the uncertainty is spurring residents and investors to park their money outside the city, a trend seen during last year's anti-government protests.
Premier Li Keqiang promised higher spending to revive China's pandemic-stricken economy and curb surging job losses.
He also said Beijing would not set a growth target for the first time since 1990, when such targets were first started to be established. Alan Booknia reports.
Li Keqiang warned the battle against the virus has not come to an end, and he said Beijing would not set a growth target, as it usually does, in order to focus on fighting the outbreak. The coronavirus pandemic began in Wuhan in December, prompting the government to isolate cities with 60 million people. China has reported around 83,000 cases and 4,634 deaths. Private sector analysts say as many as 30% of the country's urban workforce, or 130 million people, have lost their jobs at least temporarily. Li said the government's budget deficit will swell by 1 trillion yuan to help create 9 million new urban jobs. That's in line with expectations for higher spending, but a fraction of the $1 trillion US packages launched or being discussed by the US, Japan, and Europe. China's economy shrank by 6.8% year-on-year in the first quarter after factories, offices, and travel were shut down to fight the spread of COVID-19. Analysts expect little to no growth for the full year. That's down from 2019's 6.1% growth, already a multi-decade low. Li also promised to work with Washington to carry out the Phase 1 trade pact agreed to in January, in their fight over Beijing's technology ambitions and high trade surplus. The premier gave no details, but U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to back out of the deal if China fails to buy more products. Strains with Washington have been aggravated by Trump's accusations that Beijing is to blame for the virus's global spread. Alan Brooknia, TVB News.
China will increase defense spending by 6.6% this year as it struggles with an economic crisis brought on by the coronavirus outbreak. The figure is down from years of spending increases that had given China the second biggest defense budget in the world, behind the United States. The Communist Party's military wing, the People's Liberation Army, will get about $180 billion this year. As it faces a swelling government budget deficit, Beijing says the money will mostly go toward improving conditions for troops. But foreign analysts say actual spending will be much higher and will expand China's navy and weaponry to help enforce territorial claims in the South China Sea.
Hong Kong reported 2 new COVID-19 cases today, bringing the overall infection count to 1,065. Both are imported infections, including a 15-year-old boy who returned from the UK. He took Cathay Pacific flight CX252 and arrived this morning. The other person who tested positive was a 61-year-old woman who went to the Netherlands in March. She developed symptoms last month, but her condition improved. She took KLM flight KL887 to Hong Kong last Thursday and tested negative upon her arrival. She developed a cough during her home quarantine and was taken to hospital. Her test result came back positive.
Coming up on tonight's news, Hong Kong exam authorities invalidate controversial DSE history question. New URA development projects pose fresh questions about its finances. And scores of casualties feared after plane crashes in Karachi. Welcome back to TVB News. The Examinations and Assessment Authority has decided to invalidate the controversial DSE history exam question on Japan's role in China in the first half of the 20th century.
The DSE history exam's grading system will also be adjusted accordingly. Dong Yao-nie has details.
An unprecedented move by Hong Kong's exam authority to annul a disputed DSE exam question that has been answered by thousands of candidates. The decision comes amid a week of controversy raised by the DSE history question, which asked whether Japan did more good than harm to China between 1900 and 1945. The Education Bureau called for the question to be invalidated. After 2 special meetings, the Hong Kong Examinations and Assessment Authority today decided to ask the question, which accounted for 8 points. Ho Hon-kyun, chairman of Education Convergence, thinks the decision was professional as the exam authority reached this after thorough discussions. The Education Bureau defended the decision in a document submitted to LegCo for review. It says the question quoted misleading materials that would wrongly shape candidates' understanding of historical facts. It added the question compared brutalities to so-called benefits during Japan's invasion of China, and is inconsistent with the goal of a history education to establish a correct sense of values. The Bureau also says it will review the current exam mechanism to ensure the quality of DSE exam questions in the long run. Dong Yao-nie, TVB News.
The Urban Renewal Authority has announced 2 new redevelopment projects in Kowloon City, promising to boost the number of flats in the area by 5-fold.
But they are expected to take at least 10 years and cost $10 billion to complete, raising fresh concerns over the viability of the URA's finances in the long term. Here's Haley Joe.
Planning for 2 redevelopment projects kicked off today. They will turn old civil servant housing estates in Kowloon City, one on Shing Tak Street and Ma Tau Chung Road, and another on Khao Pui Long Road and Chi Kang Street, into high-density residential areas. Surrounding areas will also get a facelift with widened pedestrian walkways and underground shopping streets, which will be connected to the future Tokawan MTR station.
Government also requests ERA to earmark some of the resumed land for public housing development.
Currently, there are about 600 flats in these sites. The project aims to provide 5 times the number of flats, 3,000. But these projects could affect the authorities' cash flow over the next 10 years.
We need to use over 10 billion for the acquisition.
I will entrust the URA with a new mission.
Earlier this year, several non-executive directors of the URA raised similar concerns over the authority's financials after the chief executive asked it to take more initiative in boosting housing supply.
For the time being, the asset value of URA will be around 40 to 50 billion. For the next 3 to 4 years, we should have enough cash flow. But after 3 or 4 years, our cash flow situation may not be enough.
In the old day, once we complete all the collections of the property rights from the site, then we can do some land formation and then sell the project to those developers. But now, the URA has to be a developer of the site. That will mean the money can only be back after the project is completely get through.
Haley Zhou, TVB News.
Overseas officials say a passenger plane belonging to Pakistani International Airlines has crashed near the city of Karachi. There were no immediate reports on the number of casualties as emergency workers rushed to the scene of the crash. The Airbus A320 aircraft, coming from the city of Lahore, was carrying 99 passengers and 8 crew.
Elsewhere, and U.S. President Donald Trump visited a Ford Motor plant in Michigan, appearing in front of the cameras without a face mask, a violation of a state executive order.
As he pushes for the lifting of lockdown restrictions, Trump says the country will not be shut down again if there is a second wave of COVID-19 infections. The U.S. has more than 1.6 million cases and 96,000 deaths. Leslie Tang reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump was in the election battleground state of Michigan, touring a Ford Motor plant which is producing ventilators and personal protective equipment. He opted not to wear a face mask for the cameras, despite Ford's policy that all visitors must wear them.
Well, I had one on before. I wore one in this back area, but I didn't want to give the press the pleasure of seeing it. But no, where I had it in the back area, I did put a mask on. Everybody's been tested, and I've been tested. In fact, I was tested this morning, so it's not necessary. I think I look better in the mask. I really did. I look better in the mask, but I'm making a speech, so I won't have it now.
Michigan's Attorney General said there would be a very serious conversation with Ford for allowing Trump to violate a state executive order, which requires people to wear a mask in enclosed public spaces. Trump has urged states to lift virus restrictions to help the battered U.S. economy, despite health experts warning it could spark a second wave of infections. When asked about that scenario, Trump said the country will not be closed down again.
And we're going to open, and if there's a fire, an ember, a flame, someplace we put it out.
Meanwhile, at a roundtable discussion with African American leaders, Trump said he's spoken to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention about quickly issuing guidelines to open churches. Leslie Tang, TVB News.
U.S. President Donald Trump says repeated Russian violations have made it no longer worthwhile for the U.S. to remain in the Open Skies Treaty.
Well, the withdrawal from the agreement is the Trump administration's latest move to pull America out of a major global treaty. The pact permits more than 30 nations to conduct unarmed surveillance flights over each other's territory. The White House announced its intention yesterday to withdraw from the agreement, citing repeated abuses by Russia.
Russia didn't adhere to the treaty, so until they adhere, we will pull out. But there's a very good chance we'll make a new agreement or do something to put that agreement back together.
Pentagon officials say they, along with allies, have compiled a long list of multiple Russian violations.
including limiting flight distances over Kaliningrad to 500 kilometers, which reduces transparency in a heavily militarized area, and denying a flight over a major military exercise this past year.
The controversial pullout is expected to be completed in 6 months. NATO allies and other countries in the alliance, such as Ukraine, have pressed Washington to remain in the treaty. But the administration says it can get similar imagery at less cost from U.S. or commercial satellites. The Open Skies Treaty was proposed decades ago by U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower to promote trust and divert conflict between the U.S. and Russia. During a summit in 1990, U.S. President George H.W. Bush and Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev proclaimed an atmosphere of growing trust.
The importance of open skies will revive those negotiations.
At the time, the leaders agreed to meet on a regular basis. The treaty went into effect in 2002. The administration also pulled the U.S. out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia last year.
And that is the news. Thanks for watching.
Good night.